Hello, and a really warm welcome to you. It's great to have you with us for another deep dive today.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.
We know life, well, it throws challenges at all of us, doesn't it? And sometimes those difficulties can feel pretty overwhelming.
That's so true. And today, we're going to gently kind of explore something that might offer a different perspective on handling those tough times, especially thinking about, substance use and the journey of recovery.
Okay.
We've looked at some really insightful sources for this one. There's info from American Addiction Centers about guilt and shame,
Mm-hmm.
a really interesting study on compassion-focused therapy for opioid use disorder,
Mm-hmm.
some academic articles looking at self-compassion and substance use and, insights from places like selfcompassion.org and even Wikipedia.
Okay, quite a bit to draw on then. So the mission for this deep dive, it's really to get a handle on this idea of self-compassion. Like, what is it really? What are its main parts? And how does it connect to, well, our general well-being, but also specifically to recovery? We want this to feel supportive, like we're figuring it out together.
Absolutely.
So where do we start? How do we even begin to understand self-compassion?
Well, a really good starting point is the work of Kristen Neff. She's a major researcher in this area.
Okay.
And she defines self-compassion as essentially being kind and understanding towards yourself, especially when you're suffering or feeling inadequate.
Kind to yourself when things are hard.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And recognizing that your experience, your struggles, they're part of the common human experience. It's not just you.
Right. Everyone goes through stuff.
Precisely. And it's also about holding those painful thoughts and feelings with sort of mindful awareness, not getting totally lost in them, but not ignoring them either.
Okay, so it's not getting swept away, but also not pushing it down. That makes sense. I think sometimes the first reaction is either to beat yourself up or just pretend it's not happening.
Mm-hmm.
So how is this different from, say, self-pity or just having high self-esteem?
Yeah, that's a really, really important distinction.
Mm.
Self-pity often has that sort of poor me vibe, right? Feeling like a victim, maybe feeling isolated, like this bad thing is only happening to you.
Mm-hmm.
Self-compassion acknowledges the pain, but connects it to that shared humanity we just mentioned. It reminds you you're not alone in feeling this way.
Okay, and self-esteem.
Self-esteem can be a bit fragile sometimes. It often depends on external things, how well you do, what others think.
Right, it goes up and down.
Exactly. Self-compassion is more of an internal anchor. It's about how you relate to yourself consistently, whether you succeed or fail, feel good or bad. It's unconditional.
Ah, I get it.
Yeah.
So it's not about judging yourself as good compared to others, but just being fundamentally kind to yourself, whatever's happening.
You got it.
And you mentioned, I think, that there are specific components to it, like key ingredients.
Yes, Kristen Neff breaks it down into three core components.
Yeah.
First is self-kindness versus self-judgment. So being warm and understanding towards ourselves when we suffer, fail, or feel inadequate, rather than, criticizing ourselves harshly. Treat yourself like you treat a good friend.
That makes sense. What's the second?
Second is common humanity versus isolation. This is recognizing that suffering and personal inadequacy are just part of the shared human experience.
Right, not some personal failing that sets you apart.
Exactly. Everyone struggles. It connects us rather than isolates us. And the third part is mindfulness versus over-identification.
Mindfulness.
Yeah.
How does that fit in?
It means holding our painful thoughts and feelings in balanced awareness. We acknowledge them without exaggerating them or getting totally carried away by the negativity.
So noticing the feeling like sadness or anger without letting it completely define your whole reality in that moment.
Precisely. Observing it without judgment, without suppression, but also without getting lost in the story.
Okay, self-kindness, common humanity, mindfulness. That's a really helpful framework. And wasn't there something about measuring this? A scale?
Yes, exactly. There's the self-compassion scale, the SCS. Researchers use it, and it actually has subscales that measure both sides of those three components we just talked about, like self-kindness and self-judgment, common humanity, and isolation, mindfulness, and over-identification.
Got it. So it gives a way to kind of quantify where someone might be at with these different aspects.
Right. It helps in research to see how these things relate to other outcomes.
Okay, so we have a better idea of what self-compassion is. What does the research say about how it actually impacts us, our mental well-being, for instance?
Well, the research findings are pretty compelling, actually. Higher levels of self-compassion are consistently linked with better psychological health overall.
Like what kinds of things?
Things like greater life satisfaction, happiness, optimism, even wisdom. People tend to be more curious, more motivated by learning goals, feel more socially connected.
Wow, that's quite a list.
Yeah, and also things like taking more personal responsibility and being more emotionally resilient,
Hmm.
better able to cope with difficult situations.
Okay, that all sounds incredibly positive. So does it follow that lower self-compassion might be linked with more negative stuff?
Exactly. There's an inverse relationship.
Yeah.
Lower self-compassion is associated with things like more self-criticism, depression, anxiety, more rumination, getting stuck in those negative thought loops.
Yeah, that's tough.
Also, thought suppression, perfectionism, and even disordered eating attitudes.
Hmm.
It really highlights how our inner relationship with ourselves matters.
It really does. It seems like compassion, just generally, is being seen as more and more important for mental health.
Definitely. Compassion, both for self and others, is emerging as a key factor in resilience and overall well-being.
Okay, so it's clearly beneficial for mental health. Let's bring it back to our main focus today, substance use disorder, or SUD.
Now,
How does self-compassion connect there?
right. This is where it gets really relevant. A lot of research suggests that individuals struggling with SUDs often face challenges with emotion regulation.
Managing difficult feelings, basically.
Exactly. How to cope with distress, anxiety, sadness, anger in healthy ways. And, there's the self-medication theory.
Which suggests people might use substances to try and numb or escape those difficult emotions.
Precisely. To avoid feeling bad. And studies have found a negative correlation between self-compassion and, for example, alcohol use disorders.
Meaning less self-compassion is linked with more severe alcohol issues.
Generally, yes. Especially noted in individuals who are in the early stages of recovery, they often tend to score lower on self-compassion measures initially.
Wow. So it's like a double whammy dealing with the substance use challenge itself,
Now,
and maybe also having a harder time being kind to yourself through that incredibly difficult process.
that seems to be the case for many. And that leads us to that specific study we mentioned earlier, looking at brief compassion-focused therapy, CFT, for people with opioid use disorder.
Right, the CFT study. What did they find there? Was it practical? Did people engage with it?
Yeah, the study suggested it was feasible and acceptable. A decent number of people agreed to try it, and dropout rates were relatively low across the 3 sessions.
That sounds promising. And interestingly, the people who did the CFT actually said they wanted more sessions. That suggests they felt they were getting something valuable out of it.
Always a good sign when people want more therapy, not less.
Yeah.
So what did those sessions actually involve? What did they do?
It was designed as a brief intervention, just 3 two-hour sessions. They included some psychoeducation, like helping people understand their tricky brain, emotions, how social connection works.
Okay, some background info.
Yes. And then specific exercises, things like mindful eating, which helps build awareness,
Mhm.
learning to gently monitor thoughts, feelings, body sensations, doing compassionate body scans, and even writing compassionate letters to themselves.
That sounds quite gentle and, well, compassionate. Did it actually help? Did they see changes? Well, they measured things like depression and stress. And they did see an overall decrease in both, but that decrease happened across all groups. The CFT group, a relaxation group, and even a waitlist control group.
Ah, okay. So in this early study, it's hard to pin the decrease solely on the CFT itself.
Exactly. It needs more research. But the qualitative feedback, what participants said about their experience in the CFT group, was really positive. They talked about understanding themselves better, feeling stronger when facing difficulties, and being less self-critical.
That's really valuable feedback, even if the numbers need more investigation. Anything else notable from that study? Any cautions?
Yes, one important finding. They noticed a potential initial increase in opioid craving, specifically in the CFT group.
Oh, interesting. Why might that be?
The researchers thought it might be because the therapy helps people become more aware of the difficult underlying emotions they might have been using substances to avoid. So bringing those feelings closer to the surface could initially trigger the craving.
That makes sense. Like, opening the door to those feelings might initially make you want the old coping mechanism. It highlights the need for ongoing support, right?
Absolutely. It's complex work.
Were there other studies linking self-compassion and SUD risk more generally?
Yes, another study found that inverse relationship again. People who were identified as being at high risk for developing an SUD reported the lowest levels of self-compassion compared to lower risk groups.
So low self-compassion might be a risk factor, and higher self-compassion might be protective.
That's what the evidence seemed to suggest. It points towards self-compassion being potentially helpful not just in recovery, but maybe even in prevention.
That's a powerful thought. Okay, so digging a bit deeper, how does self-compassion actually function? How does it help, particularly with emotion regulation in the context of SUD and recovery?
Well, going back to those three components, self-kindness helps reduce the harsh self-criticism that often fuels negative cycles. Common humanity reduces the shame and isolation. Realizing you're not alone makes it easier to face things. And mindfulness helps you stay present with difficult feelings without being overwhelmed or resorting immediately to avoidance, like using substances.
So it helps you process the emotional pain rather than just reacting to it or trying to escape it.
Exactly. It fosters awareness and understanding, which allows for acceptance and change rather than judgment and avoidance.
It sounds like it could really help break that pattern of feeling bad, then using, then feeling worse about using, and so on.
That's the hope. And it also ties into this idea of recovery capital.
Recovery capital, what's that?
It's basically all the resources a person has that can help them initiate and sustain recovery. It includes external things like social support, housing, employment, sometimes called social or physical capital, but also internal resources.
Like coping skills,
Yeah,
mental health.
exactly. That's often called human capital. Things like self-efficacy, problem-solving skills, emotional regulation.
Okay, so it's like the sum total of assets you have supporting your recovery.
Yeah.
How does self-compassion build that?
Well, self-compassion, as a positive way of relating to yourself, can strengthen recovery capital in a few ways. It fosters positive emotions, and there's this theory, the broaden and build theory,
Hmm.
which suggests positive emotions actually broaden your mindset, help you see more possibilities, and build up psychological resources over time. So that builds human capital.
Okay.
And by fostering connection through common humanity, it can help build social capital, stronger relationships, less isolation. And by reducing self-criticism and improving emotional well-being, it directly boosts that internal human capital.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like it creates this upward spiral, strengthening the resources needed for recovery. You mentioned earlier, I think, a connection to groups like AA and NA.
Yes, absolutely. While they might not use the specific term self-compassion all the time, the underlying principles are really evident.
How so?
Think about the emphasis on shared experience, telling personal stories that directly taps into common humanity, reducing isolation and shame.
Right. We admitted we were powerless. There's a shared vulnerability there.
Exactly. And the focus on making amends, on forgiveness, including self-forgiveness, that resonates strongly with self-kindness. There's actually a quote in the NA Basic text where someone talks about realizing how much they'd harmed themselves and then consciously choosing self-love, self-compassion, and forgiveness.
Wow, that's powerful. Recognizing the self-inflicted pain and choosing a different path internally.
It really is. And you also see in the way members support each other, offering understanding without judgment. That models self-kindness. Plus, the spiritual growth aspect often involves developing a more loving and accepting relationship with oneself and a higher power, however understood.
So those principles of self-kindness, common humanity, and a kind of mindful acceptance are really embedded in the process, even if the label isn't always used.
I think so, yes. They contribute significantly to building that recovery capital. We talked about the social connection, the emotional regulation, the sense of meaning.
This has been incredibly illuminating. It feels like self-compassion is much more than just a nice to have. It seems really fundamental, potentially transformative, especially in facing tough challenges like SUD. So for someone listening right now, maybe thinking, okay, I get it, this sounds important, but how do I actually do it? How do I start? What are some practical first steps?
That's the crucial question, isn't it? And the good news is there are practical ways to cultivate it. It's a skill, not just a personality trait.
Okay, like what?
Well, one really simple but powerful exercise is asking yourself, how would I treat a dear friend who is going through this exact same situation?
Yeah, we're often so much harsher on ourselves.
Almost always. So that comparison can immediately highlight where you can be kinder. Another one is called the self-compassion break.
How does that work?
It's like a little mental pause. You acknowledge, okay, this is a moment of suffering. Then you remind yourself, suffering is part of life, connecting to that common humanity. And then you offer yourself some kind words, maybe even place a hand over your heart, something soothing, just a brief, intentional moment.
Acknowledging, connecting, and offering kindness. That sounds manageable.
It is. And writing can be helpful too. Maybe exploring your difficult feelings through journaling or even writing a compassionate letter to yourself as if from a really kind, wise friend.
Those sound like great starting points, not necessarily easy maybe, especially if self-criticism is a strong habit, but accessible.
Exactly. And that's key. It's a practice. It takes time. Be patient with yourself as you learn. Some days it will feel easier than others. The intention is what matters.
Gentle persistence.
Yes.
Okay, this has been such a rich discussion. If we were to try and boil it down, what's the core message you'd want listeners to take away from our deep dive today?
I think the main takeaway is that self-compassion, actively choosing to be kind to yourself, remembering you're not alone in your struggles, and holding your pain with mindful awareness isn't just fluff. It seems to be a really vital resource for psychological well-being generally, and it looks like it could play a truly significant supportive role for anyone navigating substance use challenges and the path of recovery.
Yeah, it really reframes the inner dialogue, doesn't it? Moving from critic to ally.
Beautifully put.
So, maybe a thought for you, our listener, to carry with you. Just consider gently how might you weave a little bit more self-compassion into your day, even just one small moment. What difference might that start to make for you?
Thank you truly for joining us and exploring this with us today. We really hope this conversation has been insightful and maybe offered some helpful perspectives for you.
We really do appreciate you spending your time with us. If you found this deep dive helpful, we'd be so grateful if you consider subscribing to the channel. We love digging into these kinds of topics.
And we'd love to have you back with us for our next exploration.
Absolutely. We look forward to that. Until then, please do try to be kind and gentle with yourselves. Goodbye for now.
Take care.
Goodbye.